So tips and tricks for ceramic shade selection is going to be our topic for today in the morning. And again, we all know that selecting or shade selecting for ceramic is different than what we do for composite for sure. And it's a very complex topic. I mean, when you go out there and review the literature, you will find so many topics and so many different techniques today that are available. I think that some of them out there are really, really good, but there are, they can be very technique sensitive, like the ELAB protocol. By you just to bring out one out there that some labs are using today, and it's a very nice and very well developed technique. But you have to have the card, you have to have a good camera, you have to have a polarized filter. There's a lot of things that you're going to need to get into that technique, and the most important aspect is that your lab has to be familiar with it in order for them to be able to provide the service for you using that technique. So I'm really not going to talk about I'm not going to share with you about anything related to a specific technique. I'm just going to share with you what I've been doing for the last 25 years of my practice, and just kind of communicating the shade that I have selected with the lab. But most importantly, for more complex cases, that those single veneer, single crown cases, because as I will get started, as I'll show you in my presentation, and we all know and we can all agree that a lot of our cases, when there are multiple restorations involved, or they're more complex and larger cases, it is a lot simpler because we can definitely choose whatever shade we want, and we can just go by having all the teeth made with the same shade, and we'll be very well off at the end of our case. But the more complex cases, the single tooth restoration, the single veneer, those are the ones that are really, in my mind, and I know that you would agree with me, those are the very complex cases that we are confronted with, and that we want to make sure that we can solve in a predictable manner. I always want to remember everybody about our Restorative Academy series that is starting now in November. We still have some spots left. And I want to thank everybody that I can see. I found some of you that have subscribed and have uh, are now able to participate starting November of this year. I saw a couple of your names in this webinar today, so I want to thank you for your support, and for for wanting to be part of this 6 seminar series, which is actually, it's a full weekend every month for 6 consecutive months, where we're going to be talking live directly with our 10 participants, only about how to go about these larger, more complex restorative cases, and walk you through the process while you're working on these cases in your practice. So we still have some spots left, and I would appreciate if you can share this information with others. We do have 58 continuing education credits that you can use towards your fellowship or mastership program in the Academy of General Dentistry. So keep that in mind. As usual, we want to thank our sponsors, Colteen, Oral Arts Dental Laboratories, Comet, and B&Air for supporting our program and for being part of it as well, because it's thanks to them that we are able to provide one free CE credit for each of our seminars or webinars. And today is not going to be the exception. Just make sure that once we are done with our webinar today, you go into our webpage, and you can see this is our webpage, romerodentalseminars.com. You have a link there that says webinars, and there's 3 other links underneath that webinar link. The first one is the live webinar link, where you can go in and click, and you can subscribe to future webinars. We still have 4 or 5 more webinars for this year, and they're all free. So make sure that you subscribe, because there is limited seating for our webinars. Then you have our on-demand button or link that you can click on, and you can view previous webinars. If you were not part of them live, you can always watch them on demand, and you can still get credits on them. And if you just want to review one of our webinars, you're more than welcome to visit that on-demand link, or you can visit our YouTube channel, Romero Dental Seminars, and you will have access to all our webinars there through that system as well. Finally, I want you to keep in mind that if you want to gain your CE credits, you have to complete a quiz. And there's one quiz for every of the webinars that we have of our tips and tricks series that we are offering our CE credits. So just click on that link, and you will find PDF files with the quizzes online, and you just all you have to do is just it, download the PDF file, complete the quiz, put all your information that is requested in that form, and email it to us at romerodentalseminars@gmail.com, and we will process these quizzes, and we will make sure that you get your credits for that. Today's objectives are, I think, very straightforward. First objective is to understand a simple but predictable shade selection process. Our second objective is how to effectively communicate with the lab your shade selection for ultimate aesthetic results. And again, this related to our most complex cases. And then finally, understand the different ceramic substrates used today in dentistry and how they can affect your final outcome. So, this is something important as well that we will talk about today, and hopefully we'll provide some tips and tricks so that they can be helpful in your clinical practice. So let's get into the tip and trick number one. And the tip and trick number one, it's a very basic one, and this has a lot to do with our more full mouth cases. And I wanted to put it out there because for these cases I really don't think, or at least I don't feel that there is any difficulty for us to shade select, or to communicate that shade selection with our dental laboratory. And the reason for it is because if we're going to do all these restorations in a single shot like we normally would do, we're going to just choose one shade, we're going to send it to the lab, and the lab will fabricate all the restorations at the same time, using the same substrate and using the same shade that you provided. So normally, again, you're not going to have any issues in these cases. And I never have any issues unless you are mixing different substrates. So you're combining, I don't know, crowns with veneers, and now you got different thicknesses. You have maybe a tooth that is darker, and your stump is darker than other teeth. And if you choose a glass ceramic and it's not that thick, then you may have a shade difference. So those are the things that can complicate a full mouth case. And again, I'll share with you a couple of tips and tricks for single dark teeth on how we go about working on these teeth. And you can use those same techniques for your larger cases. But again, if you choose the right substrate, and if you're doing all your restorations at one shot, this most likely is not a big issue. And I just wanted to demonstrate this to you by sharing with you this case right here, that it's a full mouth case. It's a full mouth upper and lower case that I'm going to complete. And I decided to use a combination. I'm going to use zirconia as my final ceramic restoration. So my substrate is going to be zirconia. But we all know today, and we'll review this in a couple of slides, but we all know today that we have different types of zirconias. So we have our very opacious, very strong zirconias, the ones that we've been using for the longest time, that have a 3 mole yttrium content that make them very strong and that make them very opaque. And I don't want to get into the chemistry, but I do want you to understand that these numbers that go right next to the mole number, the yttrium content percentage of each of your zirconia substrates, the difference between these numbers has a lot to do with the translucency of the actual zirconia restoration. So if you're looking for more highly or more aesthetic type of zirconia restorations, in the anterior zone, or you're looking for a single tooth, why would you choose today a more translucent zirconia? Well, because we all know that natural teeth have an inherent translucency. And that's why we normally choose a lithium disilicate type of restoration for anterior teeth, because the high translucency capabilities of this material that will allow it to match better the natural translucency of the neighboring teeth if you are just doing single or maybe 2 restorations. So keep that in mind when you are selecting your zirconia type of restorations, because today you have those options. You have an option to go for a more translucent type of zirconia, and you have to understand that if you do select more translucent type of zirconias for your anterior teeth, these are going to be different translucent wise. They're going to be, or aesthetically wise, they're going to be different than if you choose a stronger zirconia or a more opacious zirconia for your posterior teeth, which I would recommend. So now you have a yttrium 3 content or mole type of zirconia restoration for your posterior teeth that are more opaque, but at the same time they're stronger type of restorations, so they will resist better the occlusal forces or function. On the other hand, if you're looking for more aesthetic type of zirconia restorations, you will probably go to a Ytra 4 or a Ytra 5 content type of zirconia that is going to give you a more translucent, is a more combination of that tetragonial zirconia with a more spheric type of zirconia molecules that would allow more light transmission and will give you a better or a more translucent zirconia. So that being said, if you have that type of restoration in the anterior sector, you will get more translucent effect, but it will be different compared to the opacity that you will choose to use on your posterior teeth. So this case is a good example for that. And if you select all your, if you have a good selection of your shade and you send all your restorations to be fabricated at the same time, your lab, they will be able to make a stump shade and they will be able to kind of make the best match possible, even though we have to understand that the light transmission through the one type of zirconia compared to the other type of zirconia are not going to be the same. So for that specific case, what we're doing here is that now we got our final impression. And once we get our final impression, we mount our cast. And I'm not going to go through that, but you all know that this needs to be done and how it's done. Now you can see that I have my upper cast fabricated against my temporaries on the lower. You can see this is now all the restorations. And what you see on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, you're seeing on the right-hand side more of my anterior teeth. And this is 5 mole or Ytra 5 content zirconia. So this is a more translucent zirconia compared to my premolars and molars that are made out of Ytra 3 zirconia. So obviously, when I do place these or cement these or bond these in my patient's mouth, and you have light hitting these restorations, all these restorations, you will see a difference between the light transmitting capabilities of the zirconia that I selected for my anterior teeth compared to the zirconia that I selected for my posterior teeth. So please keep that in mind. If you have patients that have, very high aesthetic demands and they have very wide smiles, you may want to use your more translucent zirconia all the way down to the first or second bicuspid, and then just, use your lower content Ytra zirconia for your posterior teeth, your molars, so that you have the added strength right there. But then you don't have that slight, that greater opacity on your Ytra 3 content zirconia compared to the more light transmitting capabilities of the one that the zirconia that you selected for your premolars or your anterior teeth. This is a polarized image of the same restorations placed on the cast prior to me bonding these restorations into my patient's mouth. And what I want you to see, and the reason why I took this photo, is because I want you to see, that a good lab, these are full contour Ytra 5 zirconia restorations that have been stained. And you can see that if they add the right staining, white, a little bit of yellow, gray, you are going to get very highly aesthetic restorations with this type of substrate. Now, that being said, obviously you have to have a lab technician that has the artistic ability in their hands in order for them to provide you this type of restorations. But with this more translucent type of core, or more translucent type of restoration, you're going to get, I want you to see these now in the patients. This is the try-in day. Now, I want you to look at this photo, because if you look at this is central lateral canine. Look at the difference in opacity between my canine and the premolar. You can see it in this photo. Same thing on the other side, but it's more noticeable over here. You can see the white opaque type of shade that we have on this premolar, because this is now a stronger restoration, but at the same time a more opaque restoration that I chose for posterior teeth in this particular patient. And I gave her more translucent zirconia on my anterior teeth. Now, I think that, the result is still a really good and beautiful result. But the combination, you have to just be aware that this is going to be, you're going to see these differences. Now, I'm going to show you, this is the before photo. This is how I received this patient before we did the full mouth. And this is a very complex case. So we did bilateral sinus lift. There were some implants, 6 implants placed. clinical crown lengthening. There was a lot done in this case before we got to the final impressions and final restorations. So by no means I want you to think that this was an easy case that is that we did in a couple of sessions. This case took me maybe 8 to 10 months to complete. But what I want you to see is now the difference between the before and after. And again, on this right hand side photo, you can see the difference in opacity between my premolars, a slight difference between the premolars and the canine, because the canine is a more translucent zirconia compared to the one that we chose for the premolars and the molars for this specific case. So again, I want you to keep that in mind. But if you look at the anterior teeth and you look at this zirconia, even though it is zirconia, even though it's not as translucent as lithium disilicate, you are able today, by selecting the right zirconia and making sure that your lab understands this, and that you inform them that this is what you're looking for. You will be able to get this type of results. And most importantly, these are cases that I've worked with. All the cases that I'm going to share with you today are the ceramic was done by Oral Arts Dental Laboratories. And I want you to see the texture, the tertiary anatomy, the artistic hands that the lab technician needs to have to be able to add the stains, to add the white, the gray, the mamelons, all those things that are so important in aesthetic dentistry, that we definitely need to understand and to communicate to the lab and tell them this is what I'm looking for. But at the same time, choosing the right substrate. In this particular case, it would have been harder for me to combine, in my hands at least, it would have been harder for me to combine lithium disilicate on the 6 anterior teeth and then zirconia on the posterior teeth, because now that opaque and translucent are going to be much more noticeable, because lithium disilicate is much more translucent than any type of translucent zirconia. So translucent zirconia is more translucent than your Ytra 3 type of zirconia, which is very, very opaque, but it's not as translucent as lithium disilicate, which makes translucent zirconia stronger or more resistant to occlusal forces than lithium disilicate. But lithium disilicate is it's still a strong material, and it's a beautiful material because of its natural capacity of transmitting light, which is what at the end of the day we as restorative dentists are looking for when we have these single restoration teeth. And I'll show you a case shortly, what that means and how difficult this can be. And this is the one that I'm going to share with you in my tip and trick number 2. So I'm going to get into now that single tooth restoration that we can all agree that are the most difficult type of restorations for us to do in our clinical practice, because we want to be conservative, but we want it at the same time, we want to try to match what the surrounding dentition, and we want to make sure that it's acceptable or imperceptible to our patient. Now I mentioned those two words because when we were talking about composite shade selection, I did mention that characteristic of our dentistry and color matching, that we have to understand that sometimes we do get imperceptible restorations, and when you have large cases, it's not that complicated because you're going to restore a lot of teeth. But when you have that single tooth restoration, you have to make sure that you understand that the restoration is either going to be imperceptible, that is not going to be that easy, or is going to be acceptable, which is most likely what we achieve every day. Now, when we look at this photo, and this is how this case started, if we have to decide if this is imperceptible, acceptable, or not acceptable, it all depends on the patient's view. And this for the patient was unacceptable. So the patient came to us because they were unhappy with this specific restoration in their mouth. And if they are unhappy, we have to make sure that our restoration is going to make a difference. And that difference is that we at least want to make our final restoration acceptable to the patient if we cannot make it imperceptible to the human eye, which again is not an easy task. And I think that we can all agree on that. And by no means I'm saying that we always achieve that type of restoration. So this is my temporary. I went ahead and I removed the previous restoration. We did some modifications of some of the neighboring teeth with some composite so that we can, because the patient was unhappy with the diastema that he had between 8 and 9 as well. So we were going to change that. And now we have our temporary, we have our substrate. We're going to now scan our substrate. We're going to place our cord, and we're going to go ahead and scan that. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do here is, because this patient presented to my practice already with an existing restoration, and the tooth underneath that restoration was very, very dark. It had been endo treated for many, many years. It had a very, very dark substrate, very dark dentin. I didn't have any chance for me to bleach a tooth, because if I have a patient with a single dark tooth, and that single dark tooth does not have a restoration, my first option is always going to be to bleach that tooth and to try to get back an ideal shade in order for me to, in order to make it easy for me. That way I don't have anything to mask. And we're going to have a webinar specifically on minimally invasive techniques that we're going to start announcing shortly, and it's going to be a more private type of webinar, but you'll get the information for it, and hopefully you will join us there, and we will talk about these techniques that we normally use with dark teeth, so that we can make dentistry more predictable. But in this particular case, that we didn't have that option. We had a dark substrate, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just make a photo. I'm going to take a photo of a shade. You can use a Stump shade guide, or you can use just a regular shade guide. Just I always use the darker shade tabs. And all I'm doing here, and you can see, I'm just trying to tell the lab, hey, by the way, underneath this crown that we're going to select, this is the shade that we have. Because don't forget that the lab is only going to have a cast, and that cast is either going to be yellow or white stone or green stone, whatever color stone they're going to be using. That's what they're going to have. So they're not going to be able to see this, and that's why it is so important. And I think that we spoke a little bit about this at the beginning of our tips and trick webinars, the importance of dental photography. Because today, your lab technician, a good lab technician, will have right in front of them a huge monitor, a huge LCD, either monitor or TV, so that they can now download your photos. And the best, the higher the quality of your photos, the best resolution, the best they're going to be able to see the photos right in front of them with their cast in their hand. So that now you are communicating with them, and you're letting them know, hey, by the way, underneath this PFM crown that this patient used to have, I have this substrate with this shade. And in this case, you can see how dark A4, how dark, and it matches. It's very close to matching, but you can see how dark that stump is. Why is this important? Because now the lab technician knows and understands that they're going to have to fabricate a stump with that shade in order for them to try their crown and make sure that they're going to be able to deliver a crown that the basic shade of that crown, if it's going to be lithium disilicate in combination with that stump shade, ends up or gives you the result that you're looking for. In this particular case, look at number 8. Look at how high value that tooth was. So it was a very light tooth. And now I have to match this. I got to obtain a ceramic restoration with no metal underneath. So just a glass ceramic or a zirconia type of restoration that can hide this shade, this stump shade, and at the same time reproduce what we have on this neighboring tooth. So that's a very difficult task for the lab and for us. Now, I am using the Vita shade tab, and I have I use two different types of shade tabs. I use the Vita classic Vita shade tab, and I use the 3D Master. And I use them because this is what the majority of us have on our practices, and what the majority of us use. And I lecture and I teach a lot, so I want to use what everybody's using, because I want to make sure that I can share with you information that you can use tomorrow in your practice. So we know that the lightest uh, classic Vita classic shade tab that we have is B1. Now, why is this photo so important? Because you can see that this lateral is a little bit darker than the central. And this is the natural teeth of the patient. Patient did not want to do any bleaching. So we have to work around what the patient has and what the patient is expecting to achieve, or what the goals, his expectations are based out of what we have shown them. So in previous cases, in other photos. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a photo of my B1 shade tab located at the incisal edge, because what I'm trying to tell the lab is, in this middle portion of the tooth, where there is no effect of grays, whites, or yellows, just the middle portion where there is a solid color for the tooth, I want to know if this B1 shade tab matches here. And we can all agree that even though it's kind of close, it is not a perfect match. So the lab now understands that B1 is not as light as what the patient's substrate on his natural teeth or the patient's shade on his natural teeth really is. So this tells my lab, well, hey, I'm going to have to, if I'm going to use Emax, I know that I have light Emax links, or the question may arise, would it be better for me to use zirconia, at least a zirconia substrate, and then layer some ceramic on top of that zirconia substrate so that I can hide this stump? And that is why it is so important for that stump photo, and the importance as well of the lab fabricating that stump for you in their lab, so that when they're putting their if they do fabricate a zirconia substrate or a core, they put that core on top of that stump with the actual A4 shade, and they can say, okay, yes, I am hiding the color of the stump. Now I can layer my ceramic with whatever shade we choose, and now it's going to be easier for me to match. And I'll show you how easy this can become a mistake, because there was a mistake made for this particular case. So I'll share with you that. And here, now we are taking B1 and A1, and we're putting it right next to the tooth. And we're just, because we knew that we had a little bit of a darker shade over here, lighter shade over here. And we were just telling the lab, this is where we're at. These are the shades that we're looking at, because this is what we have in the patient's mouth, at least close to these shades, very close to them. What can we do to get this to match? So I send this out first to an X, Y, and Z lab. So a local lab. I sent out the restoration. This was one of my first cases when I moved to Augusta, so I really didn't have a really good relationship with any lab at that time. I hadn't worked with oral arts before. This is, if I'm not mistaken, this was my first case that I did work with them, and I want to share you why. I want to share with you why I decided to do that, and how difficult it can be sometimes for the lab to understand all this. If you have a lab technician that is not trained for highly aesthetic restorations, you give them all this information, they don't know how to use it. And that can be a problem, because this is the first restoration I got back. And we can all agree that even though the restoration, it kind of looks like the neighboring tooth, and I'll tell you what, a couple of things that I see that's wrong with the tooth. This appears to me, in my eyes, to be a very flat tooth. And when you look at this side photo, I want you to look at the mesial line angle of the natural tooth, of tooth number 8, and the lack of a very nice mesial line angle for tooth number 9. So tooth number 9 appears to be flat because it's missing this mesial line angle. So just little things that you say, well, how can he had not caught that? If he's looking at a cast and he's looking at a natural tooth, a number 8, how can he not replicate that? Why is he not looking at that? And I'll show you a different photo just to share with you, my critique on his work. Why did he not look at that? Again, you can see a lot of gray on that mesial aspect, less on the natural tooth. But most importantly, look at the value. This tooth appears to be gray. So that tooth, that restoration, he did not fabricate a stump. He did not use my stump shade photo to fabricate a stump shade guide and sit this crown in the patient's mouth, because you can see through that crown. This is a lithium disilicate restoration, and you can see a little bit through that crown on the gingival aspect, that dark brownish color and the lack of higher value on this crown. So again, if you are looking at a photo, if you're a good lab technician and you're looking at a photo, these things should come up to you. Now, this is the B1 shade tab color that I had sent to the lab. Same B1 that I used to take the photo right here on this tooth. And I'm taking another photo just to communicate to the lab why I was unhappy with the final restoration. And when you look at this photo, look at the gray compared to the natural tooth, and look at the gray compared to B1. So this tooth, this ceramic restoration doesn't even match the actual shade tab that I'm using to select my shade, or at least to approximate a shade to the lab and have him understand where we're at. And I think that here you can see it's a little more clear the difference in shade between this lateral incisor and this central incisor. This is a little bit darker than this. This is the patient's natural dentition, and there is no issues with this lateral incisor here. This is just the shade of that natural shade of that lateral incisor. So again, this is why these cases can become, and somewhat complex. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking the color out of the photo to evaluate, the actual value of the tooth, high or low value. And you can see that we needed higher value. So I was not going to send this case back to the same lab, because I was not happy really with a lot of things in this restoration. Now I want you to look at this, look at the mesoline angle. The staining was very, very unnatural, because I did want a little bit of white spots because the patient had them on his natural teeth, but this is not natural. The texture wasn't natural either. So again, I was really not happy with the final result. Again, the lack of that mesoline angle. You can see this better from the incisal view. You can see the grayish appearance of the ceramic here. But look at the lack of the line angle. Look at this line angle here. Look how nice and thick the line angle is natural on this tooth number 8. And look at the lack of it on tooth number 9. So, that's why this tooth appeared to be very, very flat and wide, because it was lacking a good position and wide, thick line angle. So again, this for me was going to be a redo, and that's what we decided to do. So now we're going to say, okay, and again, these are just more photos of the same restoration. I'm now I'm giving the new lab more information. So now I have the 3D master shade tab, and I'm choosing the 1M1. Now this one is a lot closer to that central aspect of the tooth. And now I'm sending the new lab, hey, this is what I had before. This is what they missed. I just don't want to have the same type of mistake. So what did Oral Arts do for me? What did the dental technician tell me? He understands that he may make the same mistake. He understands that, because now he understands why, by looking at all these photos, they understand this is not an easy case. And we're going to have to use a stump shade. We're going to have to fabricate a new restoration. We're going to have to modify the way that we are layering. All that has to happen. And they told me, we're going to send you 2 restorations. We're going to fabricate one in lithium disilicate. And this is the one that I really wanted, because I knew the capabilities. I know the capabilities of light transmission through the lithium disilicate compared to the zirconia restorations. And I'll take a black and white photo there as well, just to share with you. But I mean, these are 2 different restorations. The one on the left-hand side, lithium disilicate. The one on the right-hand side, translucent zirconia, or 5Y TZP. That is tetragonial zirconia phase. This is what we have here. So this is more the translucent type of zirconia. These are 2 different substrates in the same patient, photos taken the same day. And you can see that they both look very, very alike. Now, this is what I wanted to share with you, and I would highly recommend that you look for this article. You can find it on Google. Dr. Burgess in 2008, very nice, about the evolution of the zirconia and the composition of the material. And you can see that you have more of that cubic face zirconia combined or with that tetragonal, but less of the tetragonal. So the more cubic face allows for more light transmission and more translucency within natural translucency within the restoration, but you have lower mechanical properties compared to the Ultra 3, where you have higher mechanical properties, but obviously mainly tetragonal phase. So it's going to be more white and opaque, less aesthetic type of restoration. So those are the options that you have. And that's what we've been talking about today in the morning. But again, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and just read the article. Now, when you look at this photo, you can see that this restoration is a little bit more opaque than this one over here. And you can actually tell that right in this center of the restoration, where you can see that, this lithium disilicate, at least in my eyes and in my mind, and you can see, look at the translucent effect here in the mesial aspect, how it's almost identical to what he has on this tooth over here. And it's less visible here on this translucent zirconia, because again, you have a material that is less translucent in its entirety compared to lithium disilicate. So obviously, if you layer lithium disilicate or you cut back lithium disilicate on the incisal edge and you add a more translucent type of ceramic, you're going to get a more translucent effect. So that's just natural out of this material. So we chose with the patient because they were so alike, both restorations, and we did like more the natural the value that we had achieved on that tooth, and the natural translucency that we were able to achieve, better light transmission. The tooth will appear to be less opaque in different lighting situations for the patient. The patient and I chose to use the lithium disilicate restoration, and that's what we have. That's what we finally cemented or bonded to that substrate. And you can see it here delivered. And I just want you to compare the before and after. Now, if you ask me, is this a perfect, imperceptible restoration? My answer to that question is no, it's not. This is an acceptable restoration, acceptable to the patient, acceptable to me. And again, you're looking at a very, very close up of the photo. But when you look at this in the patient smile, and I do have the patient smile, it really, really just blends in very well. And it blended in so well that again, it was very acceptable to our patient. And at the end of the day, they are the final, they are they are the ones that are going to be, that are going to have this restoration in their mouth. And they're the ones that have to really be happy with it. And that's what we found that was the result with this particular case. Now, let me take you to tip and trick number 3. And again, I'm going to share with you a single tooth case here, and we're going to just decide to use a different substrate because this is about very complex restorations. How do we deal with them? Now, look at this case. And this is a very large case. So I'm just sharing you right where we're going to go ahead and do the restoration. But there's a lot that we did for this patient before we got to this. This is a temporary class 4 restoration that I had fabricated for this patient. And, there's a long story why I decided to do a class 4 composite temporary restoration before I did my final ceramic restoration. I'm not going to go into the details. But what I want you to know first, and the question that I always ask myself, this was a very young patient, a lot of white spots. If I want to make this easy on me, I got to get rid of those white spots. Because if I don't get rid of the white spots, the patient must be informed that if I am going to reproduce nature with my ceramic restoration, I'm going to have to add those white spots to my final restoration. And if one day the patient decides to remove the white spots from her natural teeth, then we're going to have to replace that veneer, that single veneer. And we don't want to go through that. But you know what? Patients, sometimes they just don't know that those white spots can be removed, because she had a previous restoration on that tooth number 9, and it didn't have the white spots, and it was never informed. She was never informed, her and her mom, that the white spot could be removed. So I did remove the white spots, and we started with bleaching, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I just want to share with you just the photos of all the sequence and how we get to no white spots. So now, from having all these issues, now I have this beautiful enamel, beautiful translucent enamel, where I can see all the mamelons, I can see a white halo. I mean, I have now God-given enamel that I can try to match with my eyes, because this is not only me, and then communicate this to my lab technician and have his artistry, the artistic hands and eyes that these highly skilled technicians have today, to now come back and reproduce nature. That is our ultimate goal. But it's going to be a lot easier if we do not have the white spots. So now look at the changes that we have done to this environment. Not only by doing these changes is going to make it a lot easier on us to restore this case, but most importantly, is going to make this case very, very conservative, because all we're going to do is restore that single tooth. So again, I'm not going to go into the details of everything that we did here, but one of the things that we did is that once we prepped the tooth, and now very mildly prepped because the tooth was fractured in half, so all we did is just roughen that enamel a little bit, get a little margin there, make a final impression. And we chose for this particular case a feldspathic porcelain veneer, which is the oldest type of ceramic in my mind that we can use today, but it's a beautiful ceramic. Now, for these cases, why do I like feldspathic veneers? Well, there's a couple of reasons. They're very strong if they're bonded to enamel, and we had a lot of enamel in our substrate. But number 2, and most importantly, they're a beautiful restoration. lab technicians that know how to use the material, these are really artists, and they're going to layer this restoration, and they're going to get the best natural effect within the restoration, because they're going to build everything in it. They're going to build the dentin, they're going to layer the dentin, they're going to layer your enamel, they're going to create your halo with the grays. So they're a good technician that knows how to use this material there. And it's not that easy to do, because you have to be very artistic with your hands. You have to understand how the combination of all these layers end up to one final restoration. They are going to be able to mimic nature without any hesitations, if they know and they understand these materials. So one more thing that I want to share with you here, because the tip and trick that I'm going to share with you here is how can you use different substrates and different techniques to communicate shade, because this was a really difficult case for me. It was difficult because this was a young patient that came with the mom, both very demanding, and I don't care about, I like that. I like them to be very demanding. We had all the photos, we had worked very hard to get to this type of enamel. Now we have to reproduce it. We got to make sure that we get all these intrinsic effects in our final restoration. So the first thing that I did is that when I built up my temporary, I chose a very light composite, a bleach shade composite. And why did I do that? Because what I wanted to do when I fabricated my temporary was, would that very light composite match, the basic shade of the neighboring teeth? If the answer to that is yes, then now I can go ahead and I can send my lab, because you can see, I want you to see this very high value, but this composite shade was very close to the value of the natural teeth that we had obtained after bleaching and microabrasion. So now it was very important for me to communicate with the lab. Hey, I have a composite shade that matches very well to the substrate, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get many photos of this. The first thing that I did here is I used this equipment, it's a little shade matching tool or shade selection tool. It's called Right Light 2, and it's made by a company called Adden. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of information on that. I mean, I like it for these cases. They're very useful, and they're useful because they have three lighting options. And as we all know, light is something that really helps at the time of shade selection. We've all heard that if you're tired, if you're selecting your shade in a dark room, or a room that has very little natural light coming in, it's gonna affect the final outcome. It's gonna affect the way that you can visualize shade and try to shade match at that time. So you want to try to have a very neutral environment. So this right light helps me do that. The other thing I want to do is I want to take a stump shade. Now, even though I just removed a little bit of enamel, because the enamel was thinner, obviously you're going to see more of the dentin. So I do find very, very important that I got to tell my lab, hey, by the way, this is my dentin shade. And then what I did is I took another photo of the composite temporary with with um, um, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I forgot about. Okay, so with the shade tab that I selected, that I used to select that composite. Now this is the Vita Classic shade tab that I'm using right next to the tooth, right next to my composite. They don't perfectly match, but this is how I select my composite shade. All I'm looking is for a basic shade. So I just want to make sure that they're blending in. And I just want to tell the lab, this is the lightest shade tab that I'm using. This is the lightest shade tab that I have. This is the 3D Master shade tab. This 1M1. And now I'm going to take a photo of that 1M1 right next to the composite, because I want them to see the difference in value. And I want them to see how this value that I had obtained with the composite matched the tooth. So what I did here is I cured some of that composite. I created a tooth with that composite, and I sent it to the lab so that now they had they didn't have the right lab light photo, because I never send these photos, and you'll understand why when I show you what that equipment does. But I had selected a shade using the right light. So I told them I'm going to use 1M1. Now I have the shade tab for the substrate, and I use a 3D Master for that as well. And then I'm sending a photo of my composite restoration. This is the right light too. And again, what this does is that it gives you it has three modes of light. One that is 5500 Kelvin, which is called the corrected light, and we all know that. Two, the incandescent light, which is room light, which is 3200 Kelvin. And three, a combination of these two, which is called the ambient light. So what I do is I use all three of these steps, and I make sure that the shade that I'm looking at through this little lens that you have in the center, and that's what you saw in this photo. Let me go back one. This is what you're seeing here. This photo was taken through that lens. That's why I never send this photo. This photo is what I use to select my basic shade using this right light tool right here. So you got these little lights here, and I choose and I look at the shade using these three steps: 5500, 3200, and 3900 Kelvin. And that's what this little light does for you. Then, in order for me to be able to communicate all the halo and translucent effect, I take polarized photos. And for this, you need to have a polarized filter. This is cross polarization photo. You need to have a cross polarized filter to take these photos that are made for your camera. So I'm not going to go into those into that detail, but I do use this because, as you can see, this takes away all the glare, and it tells my lab this is the anatomy, the intrinsic anatomy in that incisal third, and the way that the dentin, gray, and white combined create that halo effect on the incisal third of that tooth. Why do I give them that? Because I want them to reproduce that. Now, this is the final restoration. Look how thin this is. Look how translucent that restoration is on the cervical aspect compared to the incisal or middle third, because up here, it was a very, very thin layer of ceramic. These are very delicate restorations. They're very strong once they're cemented, but they're very delicate before bonding. So please make sure that you're very careful with these restorations. So now I'm trying in the restoration with my trying paste of the cement that I have selected, but look at the way that the shade blended in. And this was the first restoration. So we never repeated this restoration. And I feel proud when I say that, because if you think about it, if you look at all the information that I gave the lab, wouldn't you think that we should be able to achieve this type of results? Because we're giving the lab so much information. I'm giving him all this shade information. And I just feel when I read the articles out there, when I read articles by McLaren, when I read articles by different authors that are, that are talking about shade selection and how to take photos and how to combine all this, you can see that people that are doing this type of dentistry and that are achieving these results, they're giving their labs a lot of information. In McLaren's, and I'm going to use Ed McLaren as an example. He does his own ceramic. And even though he does his own ceramic, he's taking a lot of photos. He's getting a lot of information from his patient before he sits down and fabricates his own ceramic, which is, in my mind, the ideal situation. But that's not my case. I don't do my own ceramic. So I need to have a technique, a system. And in this particular case, I had a system. And what was my system? Number one, the right light. Number two, my composite. I knew that my composite had matched very well the value of the natural teeth. Well, why not fabricate a composite tooth and send it to the lab so that the lab can have that right next to them? And now they can use it at the time of shade matching the final restoration. So all this information that I gave my lab, and obviously the cross polarized photos with all the information related to that incisal third. So now I'm just ready to bond, and I just go through the bonding steps. And this is the day of cement of delivery. You can see the tissue a little bit irritated there, but look at the color. Look at the incisal third. Look at the way that the lab was able to recreate nature. This is the cross polarized photo of the restoration the day of cementation. And look at both restorations. I mean, this is, in my mind, an acceptable restoration. Patient was very, very happy. Look at the high luster. This is the natural tooth. This is the porcelain veneer. Look at the high shine, high gloss, texture, everything. Look at the line angles, everything matched. And it's because the lab was looking at every single detail. And you can see at the incisal third, you can look at the incisal third, and you can see the before. This is how we started. And now you can see the final restoration delivered, and the patient very happy with the final restoration. And I'm going to share with you one final case. And in this final case, in this final tip and trick, I'm going to give all the credit to the lab, because that is essential for success. You need to make sure that you have a lab technician that is working at the level of dentistry that you want to provide. because they will understand, and not only understand, my dental technician at Oral Arts, if we have a case that is not successful, and we have those because we're humans and we make mistakes like everybody else, they repeat the case for me at no charge. So they understand that they have a responsibility as well. And I think that you need to work with lab like these, the ones that have a vested responsibility, vested interest in you and your success, because their success is your success. You both work as a team, and you communicate as a team in order for you to deliver this type of result. So I want to share with you this last case that was done by Oral Arts as well. And I want to share with you here just the artistry in these ceramics hands. I want you to see these are 4% veneers for that case, that photo that you just saw. And look at the translucent, these are all feldspathic veneers. Look how thin these veneers were in the incisal and middle third. Look at the way the light was transmitted through those ceramic veneers. And that's what I like about feldspathic porcelain. If they are managed well and they are thin enough, the way that the light is transmitted is unparalleled, is unmatched. You, in my mind, in my hands, this is what I like the most out of this material. But at the same time, look at the way that he recreated craze lines. Look at the texture. Look at the perichematia on the gingival and middle thirds. All that artistry just done by this ceramic's hands. And this is just some photos that they shared with me just so that you can see the technique, very technique sensitive, using feldspathic veneers. They use this different layers of the ceramic, and all these layers are enamel, dentin. They use white, gray, orange, yellow, all these different shades that they go into, and then they have to either use a special type of a stone, or they use this type of technique where they use this foil paper and they literally bake the ceramic on top of that foil paper. Then they have to separate that, and it's very technique sensitive, very delicate restoration. But before they separate them from the dyes and from that foil paper, they get to do all this texturizing of the restoration and glazing of the restoration. But you as a dentist have to be very careful when you handle these restorations as well. When you're doing your trying, you can see they fit beautifully. But again, look at the crack lines, all those little things that they did, because this patient, in her canines, she had all these features. So we wanted to make sure that we reproduce them in these veneers that we were going to deliver, so that they had, and you can see, look at the halo, the craze lines. And again, look at the beautiful ceramic here. And this is all about the dental technician. This is not about me. All I did for this patient was prep those teeth, make a nice impression, give a lot of information to the lab. That's my work. But then you have another person doing the rest, which is your lab technician. And in this case, and in all the cases that I've shared with you, I give them all the credit, because they are truly the artists behind the ceramic work that you're seeing. But I want you to look at the canine and the craze lines and the gray. And I want you to look at the lateral and the centrals on both sides. Look at the craze lines here. So he was able to reproduce that on the veneers, because I wanted to recreate denture. And that's what my patient wanted as well. I did not want to go back to the canines. The canines were virgin teeth, they were intact. Nobody's going to give this patient better enamel than what she naturally had on the canines. So who am I to remove that enamel? I'm nobody to remove that enamel. I'm someone that can give her some enamel on the teeth, or replace that enamel on the teeth that had the issues. And in this particular case, were the centrals and the laterals. So again, you have to give credit to your lab technician like I do, and you have to make sure that you choose the right one so that you can get these results and they understand the complexities of your case, like the cases that I've shared with you today. So that is my final slide. And with that being said, I'm going to take your questions now.